Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful conversation with Maestro Kent Nagano. For us, it's a pleasure and honor that Maestro is here with us, sharing his experience, his knowledge, and his wisdom about music and about life. Please, Maestro, if you can join us in this conversation as we move towards the future of music.
Hello from San Francisco. Very nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Maestro. Such a great. It's so great to see you here, joining us, all of us, in this other part of the world. That sometimes we feel we're so lonely, so far away from everyone. So thank you for joining us this time virtually.
It's our pleasure.
Before we start our conversation, I would love to, if you allow me, to read a little bit about you, so people get to know you even better. Maestro Kent Nagano is a grandson of Japanese immigrants. His father was an architect, and his mother a microbiologist and pianist. And that is where his love of music comes from. His mother was convinced that art was as important as mathematics, reading, and writing in the formation of her children. He's currently the general director of the music of the Hamburg State Opera in Germany. And at the same time, he directs a scientific and musicological and artistic project called Wagner Readings, which seeks to review in detail the context in which the Ring of the Nibelung by Richard Wagner's monumental cycle of operas was created and premiered. So welcome, Kent Nagano, Maestro. And our conversation today has to do with the future of classical music. And while I was thinking about this topic, I thought of Alice in the Wonderlands, no? A story that probably we all know, but it just came to my mind, thinking about what we're all living as a society and humanity now. Somehow I related these two stories, no? When Alice was bored with her sister while she was reading a book with no images and no dialogues, and Alice suddenly sees this rabbit, no, with a watch in his hands, and she was completely attracted by this rabbit, and she follows him, no, and suddenly she like falls down into the rabbit hole, which is somehow, I feel, is very similar what we are living, no? We are going into this rabbit hole and we have no idea what is going to happen. We don't know what is going to happen tomorrow even, no? So what comes to you into mind about this story and how we can connect this, what we're living now in this time, with classical music?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this story because in my personal life, it is very true. I came from a part of California in the United States that is far away from the glamorous San Francisco or the very, very brilliant Los Angeles, where you see sunny beaches, Hollywood movie stars, the Pacific Ocean. No, where I came from was relatively isolated part of California, a very small village. And it was on the sea. And from a natural beauty point of view, it was breathtakingly beautiful. Big mountains met the sea, so it created an enormous amount of drama. My family, yes. My father was an architect and my mother was microbiologist and pianist, but the way we decided to make our living was from farming. So we We're a part of a community of farmers and fishermen, all small families. Population of my village was 900, so very small. And to go by car to the closest city, San Francisco, took 4.5 hours. So it was a long way to go. Yes, I studied the piano. Yes, I played in my little school orchestra, violin and viola, but we only got to see the symphony maybe 3 times a year. And this was very, very sad. But my most important experience growing up, similar to Alice in Wonderland, was my very important piano teacher. I began to study with him when I was 4 years old, and he was a brilliant pedagogue and really knew how to open the fantasy of young children like myself. We saw each other all of the time because he was also the chorus director of my church, and I was a member of the boys' chorus in the church. He was the director of the school orchestra, so every day I saw him for orchestra practice. And I had 3 times a week piano lessons, and on the weekends, seminars with this professor for composition theory. What did that do exactly? Well, every time I was with this professor, he took myself and my very young schoolmates on a wonderful, fantastic tour. So outside of this village, every day we had orchestra practice, or every day that I had a piano rehearsal with him, I traveled. I traveled to Vienna, I traveled to Paris, I traveled to Berlin, I traveled to Budapest, to Moscow. I went all over the world, and for that 1 hour piano lesson, I could escape my small town. And it was wonderful. It was something that all of us school children, we shared with each other. We were so excited when we left the orchestra rehearsal and discovering Beethoven's Third Symphony. This was such an exciting moment, and learning about Napoleon and learning about the Vienna conquest and how difficult it was for Beethoven to try to understand how his great hero had turned into a political villain. All of this world history, to live in another time, to be in a different place, it offered to all of us children in this small town, Morro Bay, California, a chance to, for just a moment, escape the limitations of our small town. Of course, we were very lucky. My professor invited all of the children to join, but of course not all of them did come. At this time, Morro Bay had maybe one of the most severe drug problems, drug abuse, and also very high crime rate. Many young youth would be involved both with stealing or small crimes, vandalism, usually to support a drug habit. And today, looking back, I realized that they were probably very bored. They were stuck in Morro Bay. What do you do in Morro Bay? Well, there were lots of fish and lots of farmland, lots of Pacific Ocean. But for a young person growing up in the city, there were no real divertissement, no really, no shopping malls, no movie theater, no concerts, nothing really that would be social fun. And so many of them, from boredom, I think probably just tried a drug or tried to have some excitement by stealing something. We children who benefited from this fantasy that our professor gave us, we, like I said, had the privilege to leave this small town every day for a couple of hours a day. That is why I think this story of Alice in Wonderland that you mentioned is so really appropriate, because it allows us through fantasy to develop ourselves, to dream of something beyond the natural limitations of our environment, and to have the ambition to try to realize those dreams.
Wow, this is very beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I love this idea of a world of fantasy, no? And a little bit what Caroline mentioned in the video, no, that is created in our mind, and it's so beautiful that we create the world that we want to live in, no. And I want to share that this festival is the third edition of the festival, and something very similar to your words, because we wanted to create something really incredible, something that even maybe the students cannot imagine, no, and take them to that world that it actually exists, no. But I wanted personally to share that from my own experiences and create that for the young ones, no.
Well, it is critical because classical music, especially, it is communication. And we live in a world where there is kind of a paradox. We have what we call the information age, and there's so much information to be had. But as we see, having so much information, we can become confused and think that information is communication. But they are two different things. Just to share facts, to share bits of information, we've seen all around us that it can lead to terrible misunderstandings. Whoever has accidentally sent an email, for example, before it's finished, it can really create some awkward situations, sometimes even hurt feelings, or, as I said, serious misunderstandings. And we see also on the international political stage many confusion between information and real communication. Classical music is communication. And for those of us who are musicians, we have to always remember that just playing music or producing music, it's not enough. We have to be able to listen to it. And even listening is not enough. We have to actually be able to hear it and to feel something. That's when the communication begins. And if we do listen, if we do hear and play, then there's a good chance that we hear stories, musical stories. And in the musical stories, we see development we see characters. And all of this we share, of course, with the public and with each other. And when we share it, it changes us. We become different. The alternative as musicians or as great music lovers, if we don't listen and if we don't hear, well, that means that we return to this information age. And we've seen that the paradox is it can lead to a kind of ignorance of humanity, which is very, very dangerous. So I think what we are talking about, classical music, is different from other kinds of art. It's different, say, for example, popular music. And believe me, I love popular music also. I love folk music, I love popular music. But by the definition of pop music, it's a part of fashion, and fashion is meant to disappear after a while. And classical music is different because some of it was written 200 years ago. Some of it was written 50 years ago. Some has been written today. But what makes classical music different is that it's not related to time. It exists forever. It stays with us forever. And if we stay open to that, we will learn then to have a closer communication with humanity. And it seems to me in the 21st century, this is quite an essential theme. That's why we listen to, that's why we try to hear, and that's why we play classical music.
Wonderful. As I was listening to you, I was also thinking about just the act of listening while you talk with someone, no? That many times probably we find ourselves listening to someone, but with the answer ready with the answer ready, no? Without even listening to the other person. No, so it's also an exercise to really be there, present and hearing, as you said, no? And I have to say, well, I'm a violinist also, no? And when I was a little kid, I used to play a game for myself when I played in orchestra, that I will start playing and be conscious about everything around me. And then I would probably, suddenly I would realize, oops, I was not paying attention anymore. No, so I would do this exercise constantly just to, it was a game actually. But now I realize that it's a really good game, no? Of being conscious. No?
Yes, yes. I think this, what you described, is something that happens to all of us. As I mentioned, my mother was a pianist, and she was my first piano teacher. And very interesting because she felt that myself and my brother and my sisters, that we should all learn classical music, but rather typical of an immigrant family, because my family came originally from Japan. Um, the feeling of my parents was that maybe to become a professional classical musician was too risky for supporting yourself or supporting your family. And so she felt that classical music was a kind of an education to become cultivated, to become knowledgeable, to become much more aware. But at the same time, she felt that it was an introduction to other professions, more traditional professions. It would serve as a basis. And a part of her education was to use classical music for discipline. So when I was 4 years old, I remember my mother would insist that my practice hours were 2 hours a day, focus and practice for 2 hours a day. In the morning and in late afternoon, twice. And that's why when I hear people today say, oh, children of 4 years old, they can't concentrate for longer than 5 or 10 minutes. I know that this is not really true, because if you have a really mean mother who's making you practice for 2 hours a day, you learn to really concentrate. But the day came, as I said, 3 or 4 times a year, my mother would take us to go hear the San Francisco Symphony, which was always so exciting. And one day, I think, as a part of our education for discipline, she said, okay, today, Kent and Joan, we are going to listen to Bruckner 8th Symphony. So we were very excited. We didn't know what Bruckner's 8th Symphony was. We didn't know that this symphony was considered one of the most difficult, most serious symphony, and it lasts for 1 hour and 30 minutes without stop. I was 6 and my sister was 5. So my mother said, okay, if you would like to go to San Francisco to listen to the symphony, I have 2 rules. One rule is that you will listen to the music and you will not say one word to each other. You just listen. So we said, yes, Mama, of course. And then she said, my second rule is that if you move one muscle, if you change your position in your seat, if you move even by a millimeter, I will take you out and we will just simply drive back home. So we sat still as a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old for 1 and 1/2 hours of Bruckner Eighth Symphony. And to be honest, the first 3 minutes were difficult. But after 3 minutes, like you, both my sister and I, we entered into another world. I don't know where we were anymore. We weren't in the concert hall anymore. We weren't sitting with my mother. We weren't sitting with 2,000 other people. We were in a different world, in a fantasy world, for 1 hour and 27 minutes. We were in a different world, and we only came out when we realized suddenly that the Bruckner Symphony had finished. Where were we for 1 hour and 27 minutes? We were in a different world, some ideal world. We were very excited. We were moving around, we were traveling in time, but it definitely was not where we were for that moment. I think this is like what you said with the game in your that you used to play in your orchestra rehearsals. This is something that's very, very important, not only for those of us who are grown up and living today, but maybe even more important for young children who are growing up, to be able to develop this ability to live in a parallel time, to live in a different moment, and at the same time remain connected, because when we return from that ideal world, we are not the same. I certainly was not the same after that experience. I suddenly had a completely different idea of colors, of dimension, of time, of space. Even at 6 years old, a different idea of what existential thinking was. So I could not agree with you more. These small games, maybe they're games, I don't know, but whatever they are, they have something to teach us about living a full life every day.
Really beautiful. Really, really thank you. And it's so beautiful also to hear you sharing with all of us from your life experiences as a child. No, it's just amazing, because and this is my other question, because I'm sure all these experiences to you, as you said, it changed you as a human being. But also I'm thinking about now you, of course, being a professional musician, no? And now I'm thinking also about all the students here at the festival, no? And how important are all these experiences, because they're going to take them to a different world. We don't know what it is. And so thank you for sharing this, because I totally agree with you too. No, how love for music starts with maybe when you're 4 years old or 6 or 7. It doesn't matter, but this one moment that something happens to you that it says, oh, I love this and I want to keep this. No, and now going towards the future of classical music, what do you think are the signals of classical music that tell us that we need to pay attention as artists?
Well, I was mentioning before that the biggest signal is when we somehow don't hear anymore. I was saying before that classical music is a form of communication. And it's a very special form of communication, different from any other kind. Because when we hear classical music, the reality is that we hear the past. I mean, technically speaking, from the time, the millisecond that it takes from producing a sound to being able to hear the sound, we are hearing the past. It's already existed. The beginning of the tone has already existed. But anyone who loves classical music, or at least knows it a little bit, we also hear the future. which is to say that when we hear something like da dee dee ya da 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 da, we know what the next note should come. We hear the next note that should come, but if that note is not the same as what we hear in our minds, it means that somehow we've been listening in the future and at the same time hearing the past. But what happens if the musician plays a wrong note? We realize that the past and the future, they don't correspond. We realize that in the moment, in the actual moment, that something is not quite right. So when we listen, we are hearing the past, we hear the future, and we hear the moment in which we live. This is a very special kind of communication. It's a communication that means that we're not just limited by, like I mentioned before, just information. We're actually communicating as an experience. To lose that, and it's possible, as a musician, you can become what we would say perhaps cynical. That means that we know how everything goes, so we don't even have to listen anymore. We know it's how it's supposed to be, so we can become very, very critical, and we're unable to really hear in actual time what's taking place. When these things begin to happen, we know that something's not quite right, and we should be paying attention. So in short, the signals is to make sure that the path of communication is open on all levels, not just performing, not just playing, but actually listening and hearing and involving the three main parts of a performance, involving the composer, involving the interpreter, and involving the public. Those are the three that combine to communicate with each other. If you somehow don't care about the public anymore, or somehow you think you know exactly how everything is supposed to be, you're losing somehow a signal that makes classical music live. These are the signs that we really need to pay attention to as both public members and as performers. Somehow, if we don't feel that communication taking place, we're beginning to put into danger classical music. That means it's not living anymore.
Wow. Something came into my mind, especially in the times that we're living. No, I'm thinking about music institutions that now they really need to listen. They really need to think and to observe what is happening around, because they had to be so flexible and so creative now with everything that we're living, no, especially what you are saying, no, it really makes me think, no, and I'm thinking also even as artists, no, and creators, that we have to keep this communication going, but it keeps coming to me, this word that you used about like hearing, like really paying attention, not to your surroundings, and now of course if we bring all of this to a bigger context, no, everything that we're living now with the COVID, like it's time to reflect, and because what happens outside is a reflection of us inside, right? Maybe we don't want to believe that, but it is the case, no? So it's so important. I'm very curious to know what you think about this, what the classical music institutions need to be doing during these times.
Well, if you haven't read it yet, I recommend it to you. It's the new book. It just came out 1 month ago, of the great pianist Alfred Brendel. I'm not sure if you know the name Alfred Brendel, but
Yes, yes, of
he's
course.
now retired, but he was one of the really 20th century greatest pianists. And he writes in his book a kind of a warning, I think, for classical music institutions, but also a warning for musicians themselves, which is, he says that we should never forget that fundamentally the arts remain non-accessible. And it's only in special circumstances that we can have access to the beauty of the arts. He said the big danger is that we confuse experience and information with being able to have an easier access to the arts or to beauty of the arts. But he said for him as a pianist, he learned that as much experience as he has had, as much knowledge as he had accumulated over his long career, that it didn't necessarily mean that he would be able to access what was necessary to experience the full beauty of art and communicate it to his public. Just having the experience doesn't mean you have automatic doorway to the beauty of the arts. Just knowing a lot of information is no guarantee that you're going to touch the beauty of the arts. That's why he was saying that it is important to always start from the beginning, to always research, to search again from the very beginning, to study thoroughly again from the beginning, and to ask all of the questions again about what is important in the music. And then he said, maybe you will, after you've done all of this work, maybe you will have then an access to the beauty of the arts, but he said it's still no guarantee. To come back to staying flexible on the institutional level, as we all know, there is a human tendency to always return to a kind of status quo thinking. Oh, this is how we did last year and it worked really well, so let's do it again. It's kind of what I call the Hollywood series phenomenon. You have Rocky 1 and then you have Rocky 2 and then you have Rocky 3, Rocky 4. It's simply to repeat what you feel has been successful before. But as we know, usually when there's a sequel to a movie, the second one is not as good as the first. The third one is not as good as the second. This is something that's very dangerous for classical music institutions. If we do a shortcut and just say, oh, well, we know how it's supposed to go. We know that our program is how it's supposed to work. We know what will sell tickets. This means that somehow you're not starting from the beginning, and you will probably have a much higher risk that you will not touch the beauty of the arts that moves people and makes the experience a full and a rich one. So I think it is important for institutions to be very, very careful to stay away from status quo. What status quo also implies is that we can do less than absolute superior quality, and somehow people won't notice. That's what status quo means. And if you somehow perform without the highest level of quality, you will no way approach the beauty of the arts. And finally, if you think that status quo is okay, and you think that you don't have to perform at the highest level possible, which unfortunately many institutions who are facing serious budget problems, they think, no, but we do it with less rehearsal time, or we do it with a less qualified soloist. This is very dangerous. Then that means that you are underestimating your public. Maybe that's the worst of all, to underestimate your public, especially for young people. If you underestimate the intelligence and the awareness and sensitivity of your public, then that means for sure that you are doomed to failure. So these are all parts of not being flexible, of not being creative, taking shortcuts, to being open to becoming cynical, which is to say that you know everything. If you go down these ways, you really put in danger the life expectancy of your arts institution. So all I can say is, for those of us who are responsible for arts institutions, we need to be constantly aware, constantly reminded of what it is that we're doing. And I should add that it's usually the young people, it's the next generation that tells us, you're not doing it right. You're being boring. This is not interesting what you're doing. Why should I come to your concert? This is something that we really need to be very, very careful. If we don't stay relevant, if we don't stay pertinent to the next generation, that means we're doing something terribly wrong, because the art should communicate universally. And it's a very good wake-up call for us. That's why now our next generation is Generation Z. We're already at Generation Z. And I listen quite a bit to my daughter, who is classic Generation Z, when she says, "Papa, this is a really bad program." So rather than saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about, I have lots of experience," I actually don't say anything. I just listen very carefully and I think about it and try to understand what Generation Z is saying. If we don't understand what Generation Z is saying, that arrogance will put in danger our arts institution.
Yeah, wow, absolutely. I mean, thank you for sharing this. It makes me think so much, no? And I was thinking about, probably some students are watching us. I hope they're watching us tonight, this afternoon, and because I noticed many times that not mostly in young musicians, but sometimes in older musicians, that we sometimes there's a resistance, no, of not allowing something new to grow, no, and I'm thinking about this because the idea of the festival, and I'm sharing this because the idea of the festival is a holistic festival, no, and we want the students to be reflective, to think about what is their role in the society as musicians. We want them to dream and with no limits. And so we ask them to do a lot of work towards that part of the festival, no? And it's interesting to realize that many of them resist this work, no? Because of the way sometimes education is structured, no? This has to be this way, and you go to a violin class, and this violin class works this way, and when you change something, like they do like this, no? And I just love what you're sharing, because I totally agree with this, no? To be open and to the world of possibilities, no?
Yes, you are right. And of course, we know that just because something is new doesn't mean that it's right.
Absolutely.
Just because something is new doesn't mean that it's better. But if we close that off and don't think about it, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being confronted with a new idea. and you think about it really carefully, and you say, no, I don't think this is the right way to go, but at least you've been open to consideration and to reflecting. That engagement is a part of communication, as we were mentioning before. It's funny that you're mentioning. Being old is actually kind of more a mental state than a biological state. When I was in my little youth orchestra playing the violin, the age of our youth orchestra was between 9 years old and 17. That was the youth orchestra. And I knew a lot of 9-year-old children who were really old already, completely closed. So they already didn't like a lot of music, and I was so astonished. So yeah, it's you can be old at any age.
We are almost in time to finish the conversation. And Maestro, I would love if you could give a message to the young musicians, to the students of the festival, just to inspire them about classical music.
Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate everyone who is a part of the festival. It means that you have already achieved a certain amount of technical ability, a certain amount of, you've demonstrated a certain amount of talent. I think it's important for all of us to realize that through classical music, if we take it very seriously, it is more than just simply the mechanics of becoming a musician that is growing. Through classical music, because as we mentioned before in this discussion, it increases our existential awareness. It places us in a different kind of a context as we approach life. That's why so many scientific studies have shown that children who study classical music, they have different concentration abilities. They're more accessible to mathematical concepts. They can solve problems abstractly rather than concretely. They have different social skills because we have to learn how to deal with working with each other to produce good music. All of these skills, they develop our ability to exercise leadership and to exercise a different kind of judgment as we face the decisions that we have in our world. I think what is mostly important is that it puts us in touch with the fundamental value system of humanity, the great humanism movement that was born of the Renaissance years, the Age of Enlightenment. And those fundamental values of humanity, which lie within classical music, are, we know them all: freedom, equality, and brotherhood. These three basic humanistic qualities, they are what classical music embodies. Every time we perform in an orchestra, we are exercising a form of democracy. We all come together. We have different backgrounds, maybe different beliefs, come from a different social strata. Maybe we come from different forms of education. We have different backgrounds. We have different dreams, different ages, different race. But we come together, and just for that moment, we decide to put our efforts and our ability together to try to create something that we could not do all by ourselves. We work together in a voluntary way that we contribute our talents and our skills to create something bigger. That's actually what democracy is by definition. We are exercising a microcosm of democratic ideals, which emphasizes brotherhood and equality and freedom. I think these parts always need leadership, and these always need inspiration. And if you achieve your dreams and your skills at becoming classical musicians. This is our shared mission, to make sure that these humanitarian ideals stay alive, that they stay relevant, and they are secure in our future world. So that would be my inspiration to you. It's a tremendous responsibility to be a musician, especially a classical musician. And the world needs you. The world has always needed you, and maybe the 21st century needs you more than ever because of the challenges that we're facing. So I wish you all good luck, a wonderful festival, and a brilliant future.
Thank you. Thank you, Maestro. So with these values of freedom, equality, and brotherhood, we finish this conversation this afternoon. And thank you, all of you, for being with us tonight. And I hope you will join us during the rest of the week. Thank you very much. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.